Oh, I didn't see you there, camera pretending to be the audience. Welcome to the show where I talk about books that nobody really cares about. If you are one of those people who likes those books, then welcome to the small, stalwart, and lonely, oh so desperately lonely club. Scene change. A short prelude before I get into my topic. YouTube doesn't promote channels that don't have a lot of subscribers or views, for obvious reasons. Unless I pay them via AdSense. So the best strategy to help me out would be word of mouth. Just tell your family and friends, or post something on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. It would be a lot of help. That would be great. Now let's get to the topic. Cyclical consumption. There have been many legitimate criticisms of capitalism. After all, it is a multifaceted system resulting in many complex interactions between its various components. But there's one criticism that I find critically important that is, for whatever reason, somewhat uncommon. When I say uncommon, I don't mean it hasn't been used at all, but rather the criticisms more frequently used are usually about the inherent social implications, or they come in the form of a Marxist critique, which usually centers around the labor theory of value, commodification, alienation, class antagonisms, etc. To be honest, I'm simplifying a bit. Marxist critiques get much more complex. In case of misunderstanding, I want to emphasize that these critiques are great. I'm not trying to depreciate their value. I'm simply stating that these critiques are common, and that there isn't much that I can add to them that you haven't heard already. What you probably haven't heard, I say tentatively while heavily insinuating I could be wrong, is the critique on cyclical consumption. Take, for example, your typical economic model of capitalism. The employer hires the employee to make the product. The employee, being paid, buys the product. The employer uses that money to invest in the business and to pay or hire employees. Or you can substitute employer, employee, and product with our Marxist counterparts, capitalist, worker, and commodity. This is, of course, highly simplified. I'm not saying that employees will always buy the products that they work on. But overall, employees do buy products as well as employers. However, that isn't important. What is important is the production-consumption cycle that acts as the engine of our economy. It powers it, sustains it, keeps it going. If anything were to interrupt or slow it down, the economy would collapse. Businesses would not be able to afford to sustain themselves, meaning that workers would not be paid, and consequently, workers would not be able to afford products from other companies, and the cycle would continue. Currency needs to constantly circulate. So what is wrong with this? The problem is resource management and waste. As useful as the system of monetary exchange is, it is simply an abstraction of what truly matters, the resources. If the system of monetary exchange is incentivizing our species to consistently produce and consume at an unsustainable rate, then it is an issue. We can partially solve this issue by investing in technologies that renew resources, but this doesn't account for all the resources that we need to manage and sustain. There still exists resources that are finite and that we lack the technological capabilities to reproduce. If we were to remove those resources from the economy and simply run it off of the resources that we could renew, how would we run the businesses that produce those limited resources? How would we pay and fund the labor that went into creating them? They can't be removed from circulation if people can't. They need to make a living as well. Would the state be capable of funding all the companies dealing with limited resources? Would public funding in a capitalist system be substantial enough to pay for it all? I suppose you can reduce the cost of labor significantly by replacing workers with automation. But the shift in human labor would be massive, and it would still fundamentally disrupt our economy. The issue of limited resources isn't the only concern. There is also ecological destruction, which is intimately tied to how many resources we have available, as well as whether or not our planet can sustain life. Overproduction and subsequent consumption incentivized by capitalism are harmful to the ecological systems that make our planet habitable. I need only reference deforestation and global warming. Also, the massive amount of waste created by this cycle contributes significantly. Waste is, by definition, a waste of resources, and finding a place to put it is ecologically destructive, like ocean dumpage. And the massive amount of waste in landfills leads to a massive amount of methane produced due to microbial metabolic processes, which also contributes to global warming. Another process that capitalists valorize that contributes to overproduction is competition. When multiple businesses are competing making the same product, it's quite evident that consumers aren't going to consume all the products created. Superfluous production is only amplified when you factor in that businesses can't accurately predict consumer demand. It is actually common practice to order a surplus in order to account for possible fluctuations in consumer demand. When you have multiple businesses creating the same product producing a surplus to account for possible fluctuations in demand, you will inevitably waste a significant amount of resources. So if you asked me whether or not I believe that capitalism could simply be reformed by regulation or some other measure, I would say no, definitely not. And yes, I was playing that banjo like a guitar, and no, it wasn't tuned. As soon as any of these aforementioned problems are solved, the process of cyclical consumption will be disrupted. And as I stated earlier, as soon as it's disrupted, or even slowed down, the economy will collapse. I've tried running through different scenarios to see if this can be circumvented, like with the examples mentioned earlier concerning public funding and automation, but I don't think this will be enough. Let me know down below if you have a solution that wouldn't require radical change. Perhaps you're more creative and would be more successful in finding an alternative. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Also, you can find me at Twitter, @Beesativity, and if you feel up to contributing to my Patreon, I'll leave that link down below. And as always, let's cogitate more next time.